All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jillian Graber, Executive Director for Tech PT, and we are very lucky to have Tiffany Taulton with us today. And thank you, Tiffany, for coming here today and talking about a sustainable Pittsburgh. Tiffany Taulton, just to give you a little bit of background about her, she's the Director of Outreach and Sustainability for Hazelwood Initiative, Inc., a community development corporation focused on preservation of affordable commercial and residential spaces in the former steel mill community on the verge of becoming Pittsburgh's newest tech hub. In her role, Tiffany oversees community engagement, communications, housing assistance, and sustainability initiatives with an eye towards strengthening equity and inclusivity in the development process. She was prior working at Hazelwood Initiative. Tiffany elevated national clean energy strategies for the Environmental Defense Fund. She also has a Bachelor's of Science in Foreign Studies from Georgetown University and a Master's of Science in Public Policy and Management from Carnegie Mellon University, as well as a certification in Permaculture Design. She has climate reality leadership and in eco districts. In addition to her work in the Hazelwood Initiative, Tiffany has also taught the environmental justice at Duquesne University, and she's a founding member of Pittsburgh's Black Environmental Collective. And last year, she had the great honor of serving the city of Pittsburgh as a member of Mayor Gainey's Infrastructure and Environmental Transition Committee. So what an amazing resume, Tiffany. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're going to really talk about the work that you've done with the Hazelwood Initiative and some other work. And we have some really wonderful visuals that Tiffany has put together for us. So Corey, if you want to go ahead to the next screen, thanks to Corey and Chelsea for being our tech on the back end. And so Tiffany, tell me a little bit about what the Hazelwood Initiative is.
So Hazelwood Initiative is a community development corporation in Hazelwood, which, as you mentioned, is a former steel community in the city of Pittsburgh. It was actually the last site of an operating steel mill in the city of Pittsburgh limits. And so Hazelwood Initiative really grew out of a time when the community was realizing that it did not want to continue in that industry and facing the pollution and all of the associated health risk. And the organization combined with another, well, it grew out of two organizations, which you can see on the screen there, which was the Hazelwood Neighborhood Maintenance Task Force and also the Hazelwood Economic Leveraging Partnership. And in 1999, it was really created as what it is today in Hazelwood Initiative. And now it focuses on not just the neighborhood blight remediation that was in the 90s and the early aughts, but now really with the development that's happening over at the former mill site, which has been renamed Hazelwood Green, it's focused on anti-displacement strategies. So really preserving affordable housing, affordable commercial space for our local entrepreneurs, and also making sure that it's a community that people want to live in. So having, accessible green spaces and making it a beautiful and safe place to live.
Yeah, and we have some of that, some of the mission up here. So you mentioned affordable homeownership or affordable housing. Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing in the picture here.
So we look at all aspects of home ownership. That's both with rentals and home ownership itself and commercial space. And so a lot of that in a neighborhood like Hazelwood, which is one of the older communities, is fixing up the housing so that people can live in safe, high quality housing. And so that's what you see there is a home that's being remodeled for someone to increase their family's wealth over time, have generational wealth by transitioning from being a renter into being a homeowner.
That's really great. And tell me a little bit about the equitable transportation access.
So that's something that we really work on with our partners. So I do attend a lot of meetings, with Pittsburghers for Public Transit and DOMI, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, listening to what the Pittsburgh regional transit. Everybody's still trying to get used to the new name change. Just listening to what they're saying and also making sure that our community voices are heard in terms of having more bus access, having more frequent buses, having safe streets and safe sidewalks. So we have a lot of conversations around that.
Yeah, and if we go to the next slide, I think this is really cool. Tell me a little bit about what we see here.
So Hazelwood at its peak, back when the steel mills were running and everybody was coming up from the South for jobs or coming over from Europe for jobs, had about 13,000 people at its peak. And today it's at less than 5,000. So it's really shrunk, like much of the city of Pittsburgh itself. Pittsburgh used to be about 605,000 and now about 300,000. And so whereas the city of Pittsburgh has shrunken about 50%, Hazelwood has lost about 65% of its population, which has left a lot of vacant land, which is one of the reasons why cleanups were so important in the early formation of the neighborhood, to make people feel like it was a safe place and not a depressing place to live where you look around and all you see are empty houses and vacant lots that aren't being taken care of.
Yeah, and so if we go to the next slide, maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the strategies. And I remember this building so well when I used to live in Squirrel Hill and Greenfield, driving from the city and driving past this building. So tell me a little bit about what we see here in the picture and some of the strategic purchases.
Right. So, as I mentioned, there's a lot of vacant land in the neighborhood, and there's a lot of poverty as many people who used to work at the steel mill lost their jobs, and all the people that worked in the associated industries and the business districts, the stores, the entertainment, the bowling alleys, all of those went out of business and people lost their jobs. And so a lot of people have been really stressed about housing, and that's one thing that we are really focusing on as we look at Hazelwood Green developing and bringing in more of the market rate housing and more of the development with all of the universities over there. We are trying to preserve affordable housing. And one way that we're doing that is that we make strategic purchases. So we bought 63 units from one of the major landlords in Hazelwood. And we are renovating those and making them, in a better state for the people that are living in them. And preserving that as permanently affordable so it can't go to speculators and be sold at market rate. We also have purchased some of the important buildings in the neighborhood, including Bergwin School, which is now the home of Propel, the former YMCA building, which is now the home of Three Rivers Village School, and Gladstone Middle School, high school. Many of the people that live in the neighborhood went to this school, and it's a very important building historically and culturally for the community. And so rather than letting that building, which has been vacant for about 20 years, be razed and just disappear, we are saving that history of the community and also converting it into affordable units so that people can stay in the neighborhood as it grows.
That's really great. And actually, I've been in Pittsburgh for probably about 22 years, and I don't even remember a time when this building here was occupied. So that's really awesome. I'm hearing that you're preserving history, but also giving the community some affordable housing opportunities. Which how will that, do you think, in the long run? How will these strategies benefit Hazelwood in the area of Pittsburgh? How do you think that the long term outcome or strategies will impact the community positively?
Well, we really hope that these strategies will allow the community to preserve the best elements of it. And so Hazelwood is, it has this proud history of a working class community where many of the people were working at the steel mill and others were supporting those that lived here with their businesses. We want to make sure that we preserve that. People have been living here for generations. And it's a mixed community, unlike many other communities in Pittsburgh, where we have about 48% Black and 48% white. And that is very unusual. So we want to make sure that we preserve that diversity and that history and that families that have been here for generations, can continue to live next to their relatives, can continue to have that support from their families through thick and thin times. That's really what we're here for, and we hope that this is a strategy that will accommodate that by preserving those affordable units for the families that need to stay, and helping those that are ready to move on to homeownership to do so as well through our affordable homeownership programs and our renovation programs.
That's awesome. And so how do you also include sustainable strategies in the development, or sustainable development here?
So a community isn't just about the buildings itself, it's also about the spirit of the community. And so we want to make sure that this isn't just the place that they live because they have to, because it's the only affordable place left in Pittsburgh, or it's the place they live because their family lives here. But we want to make sure this is a place that they live because they actually enjoy living here, that it's a beautiful place to live, that they want to live here, and that while they live here, it's a healthy place to live. And so that's really where the sustainability comes in. And we do that in a lot of different ways, including our gardens, including our greenways, and more recently, including renewable energy and solar power as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. Tell me, this is a great segue to this slide. Tell me a little bit about the community gardens.
So we have 2 community gardens that we manage actively, and a third that we try to support in the Glen Hazel community. Hazelwood Initiative does serve both Hazelwood and Glen Hazel, which we call Greater Hazelwood. And so this image that you see here is from the former YMCA building. It's the gardens behind that, and this is the Hazelwood Community Garden. It has 18 beds. Those are allotments, so residents, they give a deposit of $10 to hold their space. And they get that at the end of the season if they like it back. And that just supports the garden. And they get this bed that's quite large that they can plant anything that they want into it. And this just really helps, with the flowers that are around the garden. And the garden itself helps to, both beautify the community, provide stormwater protection, because as you can tell, it is on a hill, as much of Hazelwood is, and also helps to supplement their food sources, because we are a community without a major grocery store.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about how the folks that want their plot here, how do they learn about how to work the land, or how to grow their vegetables? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So we have a community garden manager. We have Matt Peters is in the middle there. He was the community garden manager at the time. We now have Valerie Testa, who is assisting us with that. And so what the community manager does is they give people information about the gardens. We also advertise it in our community newspaper that we publish each month. We have a circulation of about 10,000 for the homepage news. And so that gets to the major neighborhoods around the community. So gardeners, mostly from Hazelwood, but also some from Greenfield, will come in and use the garden space. They can get advice from our garden manager. And we're working on having some training days as well, volunteer days with our community garden manager, so that everybody can learn together. And the last year and this year, we've also been working with FIPS, connecting people to the FIPS program. They have a homegrown program that can help them get a garden in their backyard. And the FIPS program also has learning classes online that people can participate in.
Very cool. Yeah, it sounds really similar to our Reimagine Food Systems program with the FIPS program you were talking about. We have a backyard garden program for some of the eastern suburbs here. Next to Westmoreland County, here on the edge of Allegheny County. So that's really awesome. And I know part of that program that is run by Reimagine Turtle Creek Watershed and Airshed Communities is, that's to kind of have a similar initiative to ensure that folks have sustainable food sources, particularly folks that live in food deserts, as you were talking about. If we go to the next slide, tell us a little bit about some of the areas of work and the focus that you guys have. These are some other very cool pictures here.
Right. So we work in green spaces and green ways. So one of the things that we've talked about is we have our community gardens, which are focused on food production, but we also have gardens and parklets that we manage just to bring joy to the community, help to improve air quality and also mental health, which is a big problem in the community. We don't have a lot of access to physical or mental health with clinics and hospitals or anything like that. And with the stress that people are under, not being fully employed or, just years of the stresses that poverty can cause and the mental health toll that can put on a family, having these opportunities to just commune with nature are really important. And so we have the Elizabeth Street Parklet on the right-hand side that you can see. This was our Earth Day activity just this April 1st that we did, just renewing the space, putting some mulch down, planting some fresh flowers for spring, just making a beautiful space for people. Behind that, you may be able to see the playground. That's the Lido Land playground that Hazelwood Initiative helped to construct with support from the Mission Continues and the Playful Pittsburgh Collaborative and others, just bringing some play to the neighborhood as well. And then on the left-hand side, you can see one of our community hikes that we organized. These are with the children of the Cobra football team and Poor Law, and they are taking a look at our goats that we have doing work in the Greenway, helping to clear some of the invasives so that we can do a big tree planting and again, improve the green space, make sure that we have good stormwater control and better air quality for our community.
So you mentioned that the green space, part of the function is that it provides better air quality. It also provides stormwater retention. Are there other things that the greenways do? And for those that maybe aren't familiar with like what a greenway is, can you kind of explain that to us a little bit?
Right. So greenways are areas of the city of Pittsburgh that were some of the worst sufferers, you could say, of the flight from the city when the steel mill industry basically collapsed. So when the city emptied out and people went looking for jobs in other places, there was a lot of vacant land, and the city could not really care for all of it. And so some of those areas of vacant land, particularly those on steep hillsides, were designated as protected conservation spaces, and they are called greenways. And so these greenways are areas that cannot be developed in the future because they do pose a landslide risk. But unlike a city park, they aren't maintained by the city. So they are just passive use spaces. There's no built trails. There's no restroom. There's no basketball court or playground in the greenway. Nobody's picking up trash or doing pruning except for the neighborhood or the community ambassadors for the greenways. And these greenways, a lot of them were done in the early 80s. Hazelwood was the second greenway, I believe, that was created in 1983. So 40 years of volunteer support can be very difficult. It's not really a sustainable method for caring for anything to have fully volunteer support. And after 40 years, many of the people who initially were volunteering have moved on or passed on. And those that are in the community today, a lot of them actually didn't even realize the Greenway existed. So it was really something to have this, me moving into the community when I got this job in 2019. And I was really excited to see the Greenway and to be able to hike and everything. And I kept looking around for it, and everywhere that I thought that I could explore and get in, it said, no trespassing, private property, do not enter. And it was just very confusing. And it took some time to realize that those were actually fake signs, that the greenways are public property. They are owned by the city of Pittsburgh, and they are open for the public to go hiking and to recreate. Again, passive use. There's nothing active there, but if you want to brave the bushes and just walk through, you can. But without any sort of, city investment, the people that lived close to it just kind of took it as part of their backyard and their parking and their hunting. And so it was really kind of a process to remind people that, hey, this is a place that you can go. This is actually our neighborhood amenity that you can use, and you don't have to be scared of lions or tigers or bears. They're not there. And this is a safe place to go. So we started doing these community hikes during the pandemic, I was going sometimes twice a month, leading different groups just to show them this is a safe place, it's an enjoyable place to go. And then also working with the Greenways Partnership Program. We got some grants from the Trust for Public Lands and the National Recreation and Parks Association to help really show the city of Pittsburgh what can happen with a greenway, how beneficial it can be if you actually fund the maintenance and give the community some say and some funding to maintain that green space.
That's very cool. So how did you, like, when you first started doing your work, how did you let people know that this was land that, that they can enjoy? Like, what were some methods that you used to let people know that?
I mean, really, it was about just holding these community meetings. We have, as the Community Development Corporation, we have monthly community meetings. So we let people know what's going on in the neighborhood in all areas of development, but also having environmental development meetings once a month as well. And those are, we were doing them the last Monday. Now they are the first Monday of each month. And the community meeting is the second Tuesday. And so these are opportunities for community members to come together and learn what's going on, including in their greenways. And also, as I mentioned, we have our community newspaper, the homepage, we have our website, we have our Facebook page, and now we're on Instagram. So there are a lot of ways people can learn about it. And of course, as the community engagement person, I do go door to door. We put flyers out, flyers in the neighborhood, knock on people's doors sometimes and let them know what's going on.
That's really awesome. And so if people want to volunteer to do that, what are some ways that people can sign up to volunteer to help door knock or help get the word out in the community?
We don't actually have a volunteer program at this moment. So most of our volunteering is with when we have a community cleanup around Earth Month. We have 3 of them this month that we've done. And we'll have one on the 29th, so people can show up for that one. And that's going to be a tree ID walk on Saturday, April 29th at 10 a.m. We're going to meet at the Lytle Land Playground, which is just off of Lytle Street and the Elizabeth Street Bridge. And we're going to do a little walk around with Tree Pittsburgh, ID the trees, and then we'll come back about 11:15, and we are going to do a tree planting for a couple hours. So that'll be a fun time as well if people want to volunteer on that.
That's awesome. All right. So tell me a little bit about the next slide, Corey, if you want to go to the next one. This is talking about how where you live affects how long you live, right?
Yeah, so this is, again, an important reason why we do the work that we do. We're not just about making sure that there's affordable housing or that businesses can afford to stay in the neighborhood, but that this is a neighborhood where people want to live and that it's a healthy place for them to live. And because of all of the history of the steel mill and all of the pollution that it put out and the continued pollution that we have in the neighborhood, we do have State Road 885, known as Second Avenue, that goes to the neighborhood that brings a lot of traffic and all of the emissions that come from that, and also the pollution that comes off of the particulate matter from the tires just going through the community. We have 2 railroads that go through our community as well along the river. We also have a recycling plant that's in the community. And so all of these factors combined with the poverty and combined with the housing stock that's not in great quality. So the people might have, mold problems in their basements, or they might have poor insulation that's bringing in wind and making it cold, or just having poor indoor air quality, have made the neighborhood not as healthy as it should be. And so you can see how residency can affect your life expectancy in this graph. Allegheny County life expectancy is 72.8 years versus the US life expectancy of 78.6. So that's a pretty big difference. And you can see just how far that goes, where you get into areas like Highland Park and you're approaching near 90 years. But you look at Hazelwood and you're looking at 71, a 20-year gap, depending on what neighborhood that you live in Pittsburgh. And so this is part of the work that we do, is to make sure that we improve our community so we don't see these big gaps in having lower life expectancy.
Yeah, and actually, I heard you speak about this. There was a couple. There were a couple meetings with everything going on with the new county executive being elected here soon in Allegheny County, and I thought it was super interesting how you were talking. And it sounds like this is a really holistic method that you guys have for not just like where people live, but also access to transportation. Also, making, like you said, making sure that people have a place that they want to live, not just because they have to live there because that's all they can afford. So it sounds like a really kind of a holistic method to um, ensuring that the community has vibrancy long term. Is that how you see it?
I see it as giving people what they deserve. People shouldn't have to make a choice between having a place to live and having health.
Nice.
They deserve both.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about that all the time. It seems like it's a really common theme. And I find it interesting that there's such a discrepancy in same city, right? Different parts of the city that are actually not too far away from each other. That there's a huge difference in like life expectancy. So that's it's a little startling to think about, and I think people, if this the word gets out more about this initiative and about what you guys are doing in Hazelwood, do you think that you can see other communities within the city of Pittsburgh doing similar things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are other communities that are already doing similar things, but it definitely helps if we work together to get to pool our resources and to really push the emphasis forward on that. I don't hear you, Jillian. Are you on mute?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, so sorry. Trucks keep going by my office. I keep muting myself. Tell me a little bit about this slide. It looks like you're kind of next couple slides. We're going to break it down a little bit about some of the key health factors here.
Right. So this is just an image from our Greater Hazelwood Neighborhood Plan that was passed by the city of Pittsburgh in 2019, and just to kind of show why it's so important and how the health of a community and the life expectancy of a community can really be affected by where they live. And so here you can just see how much higher the rates of diabetes are in Hazelwood and in Glen Hazel versus other communities in the city.
And then on the next slide, do you want to talk about this a little bit?
And here you can see the rates of depression. And again, we don't have major clinical access here. We have a small clinic. Depending on your insurance, you might be able to qualify, but it's only open from like 10 a.m. to 4:30. So if you have a job, you probably won't be able to go to that clinic. But yeah, we have high rates of diabetes. We have high rates of depression in the community. We have high rates of asthma. And these are all things that are associated both with poverty, but also with poor air quality. When you have poor air quality, you are statistically shown to have higher rates of mental illness and depression, diabetes, heart issues, asthma. And so this is something that we really see can be improved by both improving the quality of people's housing through our discount home repair program, through our affordable home ownership program, through buying out some of these landlords that aren't taking great care of their properties and then taking over those properties and fixing them up, but also through our green spaces, making sure that people have access to healthy food so that they can, be of better health, making sure that they have access to green spaces so that they can get out, take a walk, lose some weight, get out, take a walk, enjoy nature. There have been studies that have said that a 45-minute walk in nature reduces your cortisol levels for 2 weeks.
Wow.
So that can really improve your mental health, reduce your stress levels, and just make you better present for your family, for your job, and just enjoy your life more. And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I think that that kind of really goes along with the next slide. And I didn't know that I try to get outside now and again when possible. I think working full time, a full time job, and all the things that we do as people, we sometimes forget to get outside and just hang out with the trees. So, do you want to talk about the next slide here? The benefits of trees. I love this.
Yeah, I took this slide from the Virginia Department of Forestry, but there are many, different studies that you can read about the many, many benefits of trees and why it's so important that this is a part of the work that we do in Hazelwood. And again, this is about preserving our community, our community's health, but also our community's heritage. We are called Hazelwood, so we are known for having woods, specifically hazelnut trees. But with all the development that's been happening, sometimes people can easily forget their roots. Haha, pun intended. um, and this is something that's really great way to not only preserve the buildings in our neighborhood, but to preserve our forest and to bring them back as an integral part of the health of our community and its economic development. And so you can see the benefits listed on the slide, including improving your heart. So spending time outside can reduce stress related hormones, cleaner air. We all know the importance of trees in soaking up carbon dioxide and also releasing oxygen, filtering out pollution particles, improved water quality. So they prevent sediment from getting into our streams by holding the soils together. We're planting trees on our many, many steep hillsides in Hazelwood in that green bay to make sure that the soil and the water aren't running down into people's basements, which could add to mold, which could reduce the quality of the air in their homes. So improving their health, reducing allergies, reducing asthma attacks. One thing that we found that was interesting when we had our Greater Hazelwood Relief Plan that was funded with Tree Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh Foundation, we did a survey and we asked people about the benefits of trees. Interestingly, very few people noted food as a benefit, but actually trees do produce food, like apples, cherries, peaches, so plums, so nuts. There's a lot of things that you can get from trees, and food is one of them. They also save energy, which is important in a community like ours. We are a very low income community with our average renter earning about $15,000 a year compared to the city average, which is close to $85,000 now for a family of four. So we are a very low income community. The cost of electricity and utility bills can be quite high as a percentage of people's income. And that can, in fact, in some cases result in them losing their homes, the inability to keep up with these energy bills. And so having trees lowers the cost of their bills because it shades their home. Trees themselves create their own kind of climate and they can cool the entire area. And so by cooling that area in the summer, they reduce people's need to use air conditioning or fans. By creating wind blocks in the winter, they reduce the need to have their heating bills on so high. So they create quite a bit of energy savings. They also reduce the heat extremes, which is important in terms of climate change. The biggest climate disaster year after year by far is heat. You have hundreds of thousands of people dying each year because of heat. And in homes where we can't really afford to put on the air conditioning, this is a significant risk that will grow with time as the climate continues to change. So it's really important for us to both protect our forest and increase the size so we can protect our people as the climate changes. And in some cases, you can even use the wood as a local wood source for perhaps heating the home, for cooking food, or just for creating another economy with selling things that are made from wood, sculptures and the such. We do have some people in the neighborhood that do make wooden furniture and sculptures. So this is an important source of benefit for the entire community.
That's awesome. And if you go to the next slide, I never thought about the tree canopy, but tell us a little bit about what's going on in this slide. This is very cool.
Right. So I just talked kind of in general about the tree benefits previously, but here you can see very concretely the areas that have the darker green, that have higher percentage of tree canopy are in most cases much cooler communities. And so it just shows you the benefit and the need to have these trees. And also how you can see in some of our poorest neighborhoods, they have the least tree cover and the hottest surface temperatures, which means that they are suffering in terms of health because it's hotter there, and quite likely in terms of economy as well, because they are paying higher energy bills to try to stay cool so that they can keep their health.
So it sounds like trees have lots and lots of different functions, and more than we, I think, sometimes think about. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Corey, and tell me a little bit about what's going on here.
So, as I mentioned before, there are so many issues that Hazelwood is facing as a former still community, as a community that really has lacked that government investment for 40 years since the still economy fell out of Pittsburgh. And it lost jobs, it lost population, had a lot of vacant property, and the city said, we can't take care of it all. And so you just have all of these areas that have been left to the community to volunteer on for 40 years, those that had the least means to be able to contribute. Really, they don't have, the jobs, the education's not there. All of the schools, all the public schools were essentially closed in Hazelwood. And so one of the things that had to happen when we look at our neighborhood plan and we see the community wants to have stability, they want to have housing, they want to have preservation of their culture and their heritage, they want to be able to stay in the community, they want to have better community health, they want to have better community green spaces. Well, the first step is to really show people what is the state of your green space. And this is yours. Just to remind them, this is yours. You can do something about it. It belongs to you. You can enjoy it and you can help improve it. And so what we see here is some of those efforts that we had, bringing people into the community and into the green space, both residents and non-residents. So you can see in the top right-hand corner, that's me I'm actually taking the picture. I'm not in the picture, but that's a group that we led with Outdoor Afro. So showing, Black environmental leaders in the neighborhood. And in Pittsburgh, this is a place that you can enjoy and hike, and just showing them what we have in Hazelwood. Because again, this is something that is not typically associated with a community like ours. We have the largest greenway in the city of Pittsburgh at 183 acres. It's actually larger than the former steel mill site at Hazelwood Green. That's 178. The greenway is 183. And so that's something a lot of people don't know about Hazelwood, that, even though it suffered all of these grave environmental injustices, even though it's a low income community, it's a community that has a large Black population, it still has trees, unlike many of the other communities with similar demographics in the city of Pittsburgh. And so bringing people into the space was the first step, just to say, look, we have this resource. Let's do something with it. Let's enjoy it. And the other part of that is let's fix it. And so the Greenway was suffering from 40 years of neglect, 40 years of people using it as a trash dump, people coming from outside the neighborhood and putting, all of their building remnants, tires, car parts, concrete blocks, bricks, just throwing them into the Greenway. And then with the residents not being able to use power tools or anything like that, you have all of these invasive species as well coming in. So lots of honeysuckle, bittersweet, ivy, knotweed, just growing over the trees and covering them to the extent you could see some of the ones in the back that we were told by an arborist, if we didn't do something, we would risk losing a lot of the trees in just 5 years.
Wow.
So this greenway that we're depending on to provide cooling to families, to prevent landslides and water runoff into their homes, to improve the air quality for our community that has a higher rate of asthma than other communities because of its still legacy and the continuing pollution from Route 885, we are about to lose the one thing that is really serving as a protective barrier to us because of all of this detritus that's in the greenway and the vines that are covering the trees. So one of the big things that we had to do was to get some help. to fix that. And that was part of the Greenways Partnership Program that I mentioned, with grants from Trust for Public Lands and the National Park and Recreation Association. Even Councilman O'Connor and the Forestry Department have helped us out with getting goats in there and getting land force in, getting volunteers to help remove some of that, the weeds and all the cover, and do some major tree plantings with Tree Pittsburgh. We've planted almost 700 trees in the community in the last 3 years through the various grants and the volunteer programs, both with our relief program as street trees and giving them out to residents to put in their backyards, and also doing plantings in the Greenway itself and the parklets that Hazelwood Initiative has created in the community.
And is that what those stakes are? Are those like
Those are trees. That's our first planting of 150 trees
that's
in
awesome.
this knotweed area.
Wow. So I wonder, I just like if we could fast forward time and see what it's going to look like in the future. That's really exciting, to see. This is a blank, a relatively blank space here, that there's nothing growing. We see some dead trees here, but cleaning that up and then planting new trees, it's just exciting to think about what the future is going to look like.
Oh, it was very not blink when we started. This was a lot of work. This was a forest of knotweed that was about 10 feet tall. So before this was here, you wouldn't have seen anything but vines and a lot of knotweed. And the
Wow.
goats mowed that down, and Land Force helped chop it down. And then we went in and planted 150 trees in this particular site. And there is still knotweed there. Every year we need to go in there and try to remove more of that knotweed, otherwise it will grow over the trees. But it will be interesting to see what it looks like in 10 years from now, because we were very intentional with Tree Pittsburgh to make sure that we planted a wide variety of trees to have that biodiversity that was lost with all of I would say probably 60% of this forest is currently just Japanese honeysuckle and a combination of knotweed. So really putting in some native tree species and also some tree species that we think will survive into the future as we get more storms and greater heat.
Yeah. Did you questions about the goats? Did you rent the goats?
Yeah, we did. We did rent the goats. So that was part of the contribution of Councilman O'Connor's office to help us afford to get the goats, and then using the National Park and Recreation Association grant the following year. So that was one of the great things about the work that I'm really proud. Hazelwood Initiative was chosen as a pilot program to see what could happen when communities are funded. And so the Trust for Public Lands, as part of their 10-minute walk to a park, really helped to fund some of this, and then using the lessons learned from that and showing how important it is to preserve our trees as really a tool for equitable development in a city that's very inequitable.
Mhm.
You can see here on this grant, Pittsburgh, people think of Pittsburgh as kind of green. It had a 92% score from the Trust for Public Lands in its 10-minute walk to a park. And this is the second year. It was lower the first year. One of the great things about our work is that the Greenway was actually redesignated as a park at the end of the Peduto administration. So now that adds to Pittsburgh's park space. But again, even though Pittsburgh has a high score from the Trust for Public Lands for having so many people close to a park, it has low scores when you talk about how big are the parks.
Mhm.
It has low scores when you talk about the equity of the parks, because when you look at where people of color live, where low income people live, they have 54% less access to nearby park space than those living in white neighborhoods.
Mhm.
Um, it's
Yeah.
pretty significant difference.
Yeah, and I'm actually looking back at that other slide. We don't have to flip back to it, but that other slide on slide 12 where we were talking about the heat map, like the heat map. It seems like where those greenest spaces are on this map are also where those coolest spaces are on that heat map. We have a question in the chat. I'm going to pop it up on the screen. If there's no volunteer program, how does one get involved if they want to help?
So Hazelwood Initiative does not have a volunteer program currently. But what we do is we do have volunteer opportunities. So if you want to follow us on Facebook or Instagram or sign up for our email list, I send out a newsletter every week to let you know what activities are happening in the neighborhood, what meetings are happening. And so when you sign up for that list, then you will be informed about when there is an opportunity to volunteer, and you can just show up and sign up for that. But I don't keep an ongoing list.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to say that the important thing about preserving green space is that this is a tool for equity. And when we talk about equity in Pittsburgh, we don't have it in terms of park space. We don't have it in terms of people's access to green spaces that can, again, improve their air quality, prevent their electricity bills from being high, and prevent their homes from being sacrificed to mold with water runoffs. And so we had this grant from the Trust for Public Lands, and then we were able to parlay that, because of our experience in Hazelwood, into a $433,000 grant for the city of Pittsburgh to expand that program to other greenways in the city of Pittsburgh.
That's
And so this just gets back to that community engagement. We talked about having community meetings and also specific meetings about the environment, and just asking people, this isn't, me, Tiffany, the person that's worked at the United Nations or the Environmental Defense Fund or city planning, saying trees are important, you should do it. But we're actually having a conversation with the community and asking them, what is it that you need? How can green space help you with that? And where do you think green space should be? So letting them decide, where should we plant a tree? Where should we have a garden? Are there places that need more green space? Are there places that need something else besides green space? Would it be better to put a house project here, or would it be better to put a forest here? Or this is a discussion that you have to have with the community, and that's part of our outreach and engagement.
nice. And if we go to the next slide, I think this is kind of going back to the dead trees, and they're being overgrown with all the ivies and things like that. Tell us a little bit about what's going on here.
Yeah, so this is pretty much the same spot that you saw before. So you saw you saw it before when it was green, and here you can see it in the winter when it was brown and overgrown, and just seeing all the vines and looking how dead it looks and realizing how dead it's going to be if those vines keep weighing it down. We actually lost quite a lot of trees in 2020 with those summer storms.
Mm-hmm.
2020, yeah, 2020, yeah, 2021, I think it was. There was a big storm that came through, and a lot of trees were knocked down. And a lot of that is because the vines were simply so heavy. When the winds came through, they just tore them down. And so it's really important for us to get those goats in there eating the base of the vine so that they can fall out of the tree dry and not pull the tree down. And then removing this knotweed. Like I said, it was about 10 feet tall.
Wow.
So here's the knotweed kind of dead in the winter, and some other vines, being held up by the Japanese honeysuckle. But yeah, that all needed to be chopped down and cleared so that we can put in native trees, younger trees that can be there for when some of these trees that we are inevitably going to lose fall down. So yeah, it's a pretty important thing to do. Our greenway needed some help, and this is the work that we've been doing.
Nice. And if we go to the next slide, that is a huge difference. That's really amazing. Tell us a little bit about what's going on here.
Yeah, and so that's something else that's really important to note, is that this tree equity problem is not just a problem for Hazelwood. As we showed on the map earlier, a lot of the neighborhoods that have the same demographics as Hazelwood don't have trees. We're lucky that we do. We don't have as many as we need near people's homes and on the streets where they walk, but we are lucky to have this greenway. Other communities don't have that, or they have greenways that are in worse shape than ours is, which, was hard for me to believe before I started taking some tours. Our greenway is super steep. No matter what we do, it's going to be difficult for some people to get into it. But it is a very steep greenway. It has a lot of issues of, making sure that we don't have landslides and the water running off and keeping the trees up there. But other greenways are also suffering and in very dire straits. And when we talk about the equity needs of those communities and the communities that are nearby, Pittsburgh is looking at a really big problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what would it take for us to revitalize all these greenways?
I think it would be good to, maybe we could just show the pictures so people have a better idea of what some of these greenways look like,
Yeah.
just to get
Go
their
ahead.
imagination.
I think that's the next slide, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, this is a Highland Park. Oh, okay. Did we skip a slide?
There's, yeah, there should be a slide before that. Yeah. Yeah, so here you can see Highland Park with 82 deer per square mile. Highland Park is probably a park that a lot of people are familiar with and think of as very beautiful and having big trees. But it is definitely losing trees, and it is losing the capacity for those trees to reproduce because there are so many deer that they are eating the little tiny baby trees and creating more landslide prone situations. Hazelwood has a deer problem as well, but you can see even bigger than the deer are all of the vines that have been growing. So again, this is the before space, before we planted, before we took out all of the knotweed, but you can just see how severe the vining problem is in the summer when everything is grown out. And if you want to take a look at the next slide, just emphasizing a lot of Pittsburgh's green spaces are suffering in ways that people may not notice. When you take a walk in the summer, you may think, wow, it's so beautiful. Everything's lush and it's green. And underneath the surface, you're not seeing what we see when we look at worms, invasive worms that are chewing the topsoil up and deleting all the nutrients from it and
Wow.
making it more likely to cause landslides and making it more difficult for plants to grow. And you can see some of the landslide damage. You have areas that are undermined in the city that haven't been cared for. And now that we have different water situation going on with climate change and these big storms that come through, these areas become less stable than they were before. Add to that deer pressure that's making the trees not hold the soil. Add to that worms that are making the soil not stable and be more fragile. We are looking at some major landslide issues in the city of Pittsburgh. We are looking at a major loss of tree diversity. And lack of trees means that the soil is running even more, and we have even more heat problems and even more air quality problems.
Yeah.
Um, and so this is a problem for the entire city of Pittsburgh. The great thing about the grant from the National Recreation and Parks Association is that it was not only just for Hazelwood, it was really to expand the pilot to other greenways and to show that what we can do. But I want to emphasize that there is more work that needs to be done than just the greenways. Pittsburgh as a city needs to look at all of its green spaces and all of its tree canopy.
Yeah, and actually, we have a question here in the chat. Is there a candidate for Allegheny County Executive that would be the most helpful to work with? And I want to, before we answer that, I want to just acknowledge that we're 501c3 here, and so we can't endorse any particular candidate. But I know, Tiffany, you've been involved in some of the conversations in the candidate forums that have been going on around the city.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to state the same thing. Hazelwood Initiative is also a 501c3, so we're not endorsing any particular candidate. What I really want to do is just make sure through my conversations with them and through my conversations with people like yourselves that are listening to this, that you are aware of the threats that are facing our green spaces and facing the city of Pittsburgh in the future in terms of climate resilience. And I want that to be taken into account. So you want to look for a candidate that shows some knowledge of the tree canopy, shows some knowledge of the fact that there are these threats that aren't really talked about a lot. So, not a lot of people are talking about the worm situation yet. You don't have a lot of people talking about undermining or the threat of the vines. I would say a risk that is even less talked about is the air pollution itself. Pennsylvania is a gas state, and there are many, many studies that show that methane release actually kills trees.
Yeah.
So you have methane killing trees. So some of you, depending on your neighborhood, if you are living in a neighborhood like mine, which has not been invested in and has been neglected for a long time, there are places where you can walk down the street and smell the gas being released.
Yeah.
And
And
that is
from
not good for people, and it's not good for trees.
Yeah, and it's not just like natural gas from, pipelines. It's from the sewer too, correct? We're getting sewer gases and in cities. Are there other places where where gases are coming from?
Yeah, there's also the threat that you have from the cars themselves, which I think is really underrated. We have the word is slipping my mind. Ground level ozone layers are increasing substantially as the heat concentrations increase. It just changes the chemistry of what's in the air, and that itself is also killing trees. And so we have to look at trees from a holistic standpoint. You mentioned that holistic vision. I'm not just saying to people, you can have a choice of having an affordable home or having health, right? It's not a choice if you can have trees or a house, you can have clean water or a house. Like, people are human beings, they deserve both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say every creature on our planet deserves both, to have a place to live and to have clean air and clean water, to drink and survive off of. And so these are issues that have to be taken a closer look at. So we in Hazelwood, we are looking at how can we improve our greenway and protect it, because if we don't, like I said, we are going to lose it. We have so many threats to the greenway, from the deer eating the baby trees to these potential worms that could come in, to dumping. The dumping really destroys a lot when you have these contaminants and tires just leaning on things, or concrete. When we did our latest planting, we actually had to reduce the number of trees we were planning to do by almost 100,
Wow.
because there was so much concrete underneath the knotweed. Once
Wow.
we removed it, we couldn't plant where we had planned to plant because there had been so much dumping.
Wow.
And so I have a real concern that many Pittsburghers may be looking to their greenways to save them from climate change, and to think about all of the climate resilience of the city and the greenways and the parks. But the greenways and the parks are not big enough, and they are not being maintained to a standard that will allow them to survive in the future. They
Yeah.
are threatened, and that threat has not been appropriately recognized.
Yeah. And I think that that kind of goes along with the next slide with working with the mayor's infrastructure and planning committee. So how can we change that to make sure that we have green spaces for the future, and that they are able to be sustained, and that and with climate change and all of the other issues we have going on, the extreme weather and things like that, how do we make sure that we're planning for the future?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that we do have to have better communication with our representatives in the city, and also with our own communities. So each community has a greenway. Well, maybe not each community, but communities that have greenways, they are all suffering. They all have problems, but may not realize that they have similar problems and that they can work together. And so one of the things that I've been doing more recently, as part of this Greenways Partnership Program with the city, is that we have used the grant from the National Recreation and Park Association to take the lessons learned from the Hazelwood Greenway project to now look at what's going on in Beachview and Seldom Seen, and other communities, and say, how can we address those greenway situations? What are they facing? How can their residents get involved in preserving their greenways? But also the need to bring it to the city's attention that there are many areas of the city that are not protected in the Greenways program. The city lost half its population. There is a lot of vacant land in the city of Pittsburgh, and not all of that needs to be developed for housing, as our population still is not growing substantially. We need to look at where can we protect more land and expand those greenways. Again, the Trust for Public Land, Pittsburgh has a high score for having people within proximity to a green space. It has a low score for the amount of land that is protected as a green space. And it has a low score for the quality and maintenance of that green space.
Yeah.
So those two aspects, the quality and the size of the green space, need to be improved upon to protect the city's climate resilience in the future. And especially if the city thinks it's going to grow in the future, it needs to think about not only having enough housing, but having enough green space to support a larger population. I think a lot of people realized during the pandemic how not comfortable it is when you have too many people in the park space, and how damaging that can be for a park space. So every community needs to have a sizable park, and that park needs to be protected so that it can survive when the next wind or rainstorm comes through.
Yeah, yeah. And if you go to the next screen, we're going to talk about this model for resilience, right? So I think you spoke a little bit about resilience, but tell me a little bit more.
Right. So I'm very, very proud of the work that we've done in Hazelwood. We're a small community, less than 5,000 residents. And we have been this pilot for the city, both from the Trust for Public Lands, then helping the city to gain these grants from the National Park and National Recreation and Park Association. That was $433,000 to expand Greenway's work as an equity solution and climate resilience solution. And then taking that and working with the Resilient Cities Catalyst program, they came back into Hazelwood and looked at our greenways and said, well, this is a very hilly area. How can protecting the forest help to protect a community against landslides? Because in 2018, the city of Pittsburgh suffered $12 million in damages from
Wow.
landslides. 12 million. And there was an article just earlier this year in Public Source about, some of those houses and families that are still being affected, looking at their properties going down a hill and have not received the help that they need.
Yeah.
And so we need to look at resilience citywide. How can we protect people's homes from landslides? And how can we protect them again from the largest disaster of climate, which is heat?
Yeah.
And so Resilient Cities Catalyst came in with a small $5,000 grant, looked at Hazelwood, the work that we were doing, and then applied for a larger grant from ICLE USA, which is a group of climate of cities around the world that are looking at climate resilience. And because of that work and that proposal that was made from the Resilient Cities Catalyst, the city of Pittsburgh received a $1 million grant.
Wow.
And so now they are really looking at trees and green infrastructure as a climate resilience tool for heat vulnerability and landslides. And so what I would say, the list here that the city needs to focus on is doing what Hazelwood has done at a larger scale. So removing the damaging garbage and plants from the greenways, increasing biodiversity with plantings, improving community access because people cannot protect and love what they don't know exists. So they need to have access to it. We need to increase the size of our tree canopy throughout the city. People may think that they have a lot of trees, but again, many of these trees are in danger and will not survive. So we need to start planting today to make sure that we have trees that are surviving and removing any barriers to their survival. And that includes providing long-term maintenance funding. We can't have a forestry department of just 3 or 5 people. Every community needs to have people in that community that are being paid to preserve those trees and paid to look out for the overall health of those trees year to year. And that means also reducing future threats to the canopy, which include pollution. I mentioned methane releases. So we have a lot of gas pipelines that are not being controlled within the city. We have pollution from roads and cars. So that means increasing our public transportation, increasing our electric vehicle usage so we can get some of that pollution from the street off. The pest management and also development. Development may be the largest pest there is because just because it's a development doesn't mean it's a good one. People should not have to choose between housing and their health.
Yeah.
So we really need to look at where are we putting housing in relation to trees and where can we put more trees so that they are closer to people and that they have the means to survive. And just as a couple of examples, 2 things that really irritate me about the way that we do development. One, we will let people plant trees 1 foot from a building. We know these trees are not going to survive. Stop allowing this. Stop allowing this. We need to make a requirement that trees are given a certain amount of space from a building, that buildings are not built all the way up to the sidewalk with just a little sliver for trees. And then when the trees get in the building's way, then it's okay to cut down. If developers are required to plant trees for the city's health, they should be required to maintain those trees and to plant them in conditions that will allow them to survive long term.
Yeah.
Because a little tiny tree that is 2 years old does not provide the same kind of ecosystem services as a 30-year-old tree. We need to allow trees to grow to their full size. right? So we need to change our development requirements to allow that. The second thing is we need to make sure that we provide light for trees. So not only space for them to grow to their full size, but also light. I am very, very concerned about the number of increasingly tall buildings that are going up in the center of the city, and the fact that developers are allowed to supersede their height limits by giving other sorts of concessions. Again, people should not have to choose between having food in a grocery store or having a forest.
Yeah.
So you should not be allowed to build your building 20 feet taller just because you provide a grocery store. We still need trees in
Yeah.
the city for air quality, for reduced heat extremes, for reduced mental health problems, for happiness. We need trees in the city. So we need to make sure that our development criteria take that into account, taking into account that trees can live a long time. And that also means that we cannot depend on just planting street trees. We need to actually preserve forested areas where trees can grow to their full size and create the biodiversity that we need. So these are some things I would like to see the city of Pittsburgh really emphasize: greater tree canopy in forest that's protected, and reducing the barriers to trees growing to their full size. That means they need more space on sidewalks, they need more space in front of buildings, and we need to not block them in with tall buildings that are going to prevent the sun or create these wind corridors that are going to knock them over and dry them out.
Yeah. So I hear a rally cry for trees. Let's plant more trees, but let's be thoughtful about it and plant them where we need them, and allow that and make sure developers have limits on what they can do. I think that that's really, and I think that if every green space in Pittsburgh could use this model, we would be looking at a lot more great places to recreate and to live in our city, and I think that that would be really a wonderful thing. And
Yeah,
so
and plant more than you think you need because we don't know how many will survive the way the climate's going.
that's right, that's right, and we're seeing more and more climate issues every single day. Well, Tiffany, this was really awesome getting to know the work that you're doing a little bit better, and thank you so much for your time today and joining us. I hope people learned. I know I learned a lot about greenways and about why we need greenways, how we can preserve them, and how this really is a model for resilience in our communities. How we can make sure that people have a clean and healthy place to live, and all the things that they need as a community to ensure that they live longer and happier and healthier lives. So thank you so much for being with us today. I want to
Thanks for
go
having
ahead.
me.
Yeah, I want to really quickly before we head off go to the next slide, and just say thanks for tuning in. Next time we're going to have on May 30th Christina Mersick. She's going to be here with her new book. And then if you go to the last slide really quickly, Corey, we're having a food drive right now with the Westmoreland County Food Bank. So anybody that would be able to bring in food collections into our office. Actually, this week we're having also a seed exchange. So bring in food, get some native plants from the Audubon Society. We have some seeds to distribute to folks that are able to provide and help the Westmoreland Food Bank. So give some food, get some seeds, plant some seeds, and I think plant some trees. You know, perhaps if you have space in your neighborhood to plant some trees. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for joining us today, and I hope to see you again very, very soon. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Thanks to everybody who attended.
Bye.